Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined today by Carl Cannon, our Washington Bureau Chief and Executive Editor. And sitting in for Andrew Walworth is Phil Wegmann, our White House reporter. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
So, Phil, let's start with you because Donald Trump had a very eventful weekend. He was at the Army-Navy game over the weekend, and then just earlier today gave a press conference and had some announcements from the CEO of SoftBank announce $100 billion investment in the United States, which Trump obviously touted, and tried to get him to do $200 billion, which was kind of humorous. But then also took questions from reporters. What was the sort of takeaway, Phil? What were the headlines made? And what was it like to have a press conference again?
The takeaway here is that the Trump era of freewheeling transparency is back. He was at the podium there in Mar-a-Lago for more than an hour, fielding any question that the press had for him, making off-the-cuff remarks. And we saw the president-elect discuss everything from the drones that we're seeing over New Jersey. He said that the government knows what they are and encouraged the feds to be more forthright, but didn't give any more details. He discussed RFK Jr., his HHS nominee, and also sort of speculated about some of these vaccines. But yeah, I think that the takeaway here is that Donald Trump had a press conference, welcomed all comers, was willing to take all sorts of questions completely off the cuff. And then in Washington, D.C., the current president, President Biden, was giving a speech where he spoke just off of the teleprompter, took no questions. There are different kinds of events, certainly, but this tells us something as we return for the second season of Donald Trump, and that is this guy is his own spokesperson, and there's going to be very few times over the next 4 years that the public doesn't know just exactly what he's thinking.
Carl, you know, it was a striking contrast. You've got Trump, he's doing his thing, he's talking. I mean, he was asked about the Luigi Mangione, condemned him as a, sick killer. I mean, he was talked about whatever. And then you have Biden, who's sort of reading from a prompter, as we've seen him for the past few months. I don't know, he barely took any questions at all from the press, certainly not in any sort of formal setting for the last months and months of his administration. And so quite a contrast, as again, we talk about this all the time, that, Trump's not officially president for another, 6 weeks. And yet he is acting very much the part. And Biden, who is the current president, seems to be just sort of, fading away and not really making much of an impact.
Well, we've got several weeks yet to go. It's January 20th. I guess some people are crossing their fingers. It's not just the contrast between President Biden and President-elect Trump, though. Kamala Harris, we'll be talking about her later in the show, but Phil, correct me if I'm wrong. She got the nomination in July. I think she has yet to hold a formal standard press conference.
You're absolutely right.
Go ahead.
Well, you're right. And instead of hearing from the vice president reflecting on her candidacy, we've heard from a number of sort of disgruntled aides who have given their diagnosis for what exactly went wrong. The last time I saw the vice president was when she accompanied President Biden to the Kennedy Center Awards. But for the most part, you look at the daily guidance every morning as a reporter to figure out where these people are going to be, what they're going to be doing. And what we've seen again and again is that Vice President Harris has private meetings and that they are all closed press.
Yeah, Tom, that to me, it's like a lack of confidence in themselves. Biden's aides, don't trust him not to make a gaffe. We all get that. I don't want to belabor the pointer, and I certainly kick somebody when they're down. But I don't know what Kamala Harris' excuse was, but look, Donald Trump, I'll be the first to admit, some of his confidence is misplaced in himself. I think he said over the weekend that what did he study that he,
oh boy.
I got it. It's the ports, automation. He said he'd studied automation more than anybody had ever studied automation. He actually said that. And sometimes, if it's Trump or the Onion speaking. But one thing is, he's got this self-confidence, and the presidency, it's a communications job. It's commander in chief of the armed forces, but it's also kind of a cheerleader's job. And the team is America, and you're supposed to project confidence in the country and yourself. And he certainly does that. And it seems to me the Democrats, they need a little of that. They need somebody who
Well,
talk about the issues with confidence and ease, and
but that's part of the phase that we're in. I mean, they just took a beating at the polls. So they're rightfully not confident about their messaging or their messenger or, exactly. And
or their policies.
or their policies. And meanwhile, Trump is feeling very much like he should have confidence, right? He took his message to the American people and won. Phil, one of the questions that he was asked is what's different about this time versus last time? And he said, last time around, I was fighting everybody, and this time, everybody wants to be my friend. uh, he didn't name names necessarily, but certainly that's true among Republicans. Right? When he took office last time, you had a whole bunch of never-Trumpers in the Senate in particular. They're effectively have been sidelined or voted out or retired or whatever. And that's certainly true. I think he seems to have, I wouldn't say friends in the media, but he's ignoring the media. He's not fighting with the media as much. He seems to be maybe even, communicating above the media, a la Ronald Reagan back in the day. But I thought that was an interesting response.
But Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg gave him $1 million, gave the inauguration $1 million each. So I guess that's what he means when they say everybody wants to be my friend.
And he also mentioned at the press conference that he had Sergey Brin from Google, and he was chiding the press. They didn't pick up on that. Nobody reported that he had made friends with him as well.
Well, certainly during the press conference, Donald Trump complained about 60 Minutes. He complained about, Bob Woodward. But I think you're right in that the larger sense here is we don't see Trump as combative over every little story that comes across his Twitter feed, like we saw during his first term. And I think the difference here, when you say that everyone wants to be, that Trump says everyone wants to be his friend is A, you're right. He's remade the Republican Party in his own image, so he doesn't have as many internal enemies. But B, they're gearing up for what they had hoped would be a second term. He knows his people, he knows his personnel, and this time the big difference in their minds is they don't see another scandal like the Russian collusion accusations coming for them. They don't see as much manpower and energy having to be dedicated to fighting back against that sort of thing. So it's all hands on deck and pointed in one direction.
We're speaking with Phil Wegmann, our White House reporter, Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Carl, I mentioned the Army-Navy game. Awesome event every single year. Trump was there and had this entourage of people, including Elon Musk, Daniel Penny, the former Marine who was just acquitted in New York City in that subway case, but also Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, I think Kash Patel was there. I mean, he had a lot of his potential cabinet folks with him. Sort of, I don't know if it was a show of strength, but it certainly was. He had the whole band there watching this game. What do you make of that?
Well, and for the Army guys and Tulsi Gabbard, Army, it was a tough day. They have this quarterback who finished. The Army was 11-1 this year. Their football team. They had this quarterback who finished 6th in the Heisman Trophy race. I think he probably should have been 4th. But Navy's quarterback showed up and completely outplayed him. He was tired of hearing about Army's quarterback, Blake Horvath, and he ran all over Army. And it was a great upset. And I mean, Army was favored and Navy won easily. And I was wondering if Trump was identifying as Navy in the game because Navy's the goats, right?
Yeah.
He's stubborn like a billy goat.
So, and we sort of, laugh at the spectacle sometimes. We enjoy it. Trump is certainly out there and it makes for a good photo opportunity. But behind the scenes, folks who want something from this administration are watching very closely. How do they get into that inner circle? A good example of this is not only was Pete Hegseth at the game as he tries to keep his defense secretary nomination alive, but so too was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And there's sort of all this back channeling in between these two. So, during the campaign, we watched UFC to see who was sitting with the Republican candidate. Perhaps we've got to watch him at other events to see who makes it into his cabinet.
Well, Phil, I was going to ask you, I mean, what's the status of these nominations? It looks like from everything that I've seen and heard and read that Hegseth sort of made a recovery, is on a sort of glide path, if you will. Still going to have hearings, still going to have to answer questions. We'll see what happens, but certainly not in the dire shape that he was, let's say, 10 days ago. What about Tulsi Gabbard? What about Kash Patel? What about RFK Jr.? I mean, those seem to be the ones. It sounds like RFK is going to start having meetings here pretty soon. I've read some stories about Tulsi Gabbard that her meetings weren't going well. I'm not sure if that was accurate or not, or what's going on. What's your take on where these nominations currently stand?
Well, you mentioned each of those nominations, and it was almost a increasing level of concern. They're going to get more difficult as time goes on. I think Hegseth has held on and survived because he refused to go anywhere. With Tulsi Gabbard, what I'm hearing from folks in her camp is that her sort of heterodox views on foreign policy, well, they're not heterodox anymore because they largely align with what President-elect Trump wants. And that message has gone out to Republicans. I'm still curious, though, whether or not she's able to get enough votes. Similarly with Kash Patel, with RFK Jr. But, Trump he believes he has a mandate. And he believes he achieved a realignment at the polls. Now he wants that realignment in his cabinet. And I think the crown jewels for him are Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. Those are the picks that he wants in his cabinet to really make this historic. And we'll see if they can survive. As of right now, though, Republicans are looking around and seeing the treatment that Iowa Senator Joni Ernst got just for questioning whether or not Hegseth could be confirmed. And they're saying to themselves, do I really want that? And so that's why I think some of the grumbling that we've seen about Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, in that story from The Hill, that was all from Republican senators on background, not with their names attached.
Well, but Tom, there's going to be hearings, and she's going to have to answer some tough questions in public from Democrats, and the Republican senators are going to be listening. And, Hafez Assad, is in Russia now, and he's out of Syria. She's going to be asked about her meeting there and asked to explain it. She's talked about it in the past, but there are going to be follow-up questions. It's going to be a tense environment. Bobby Kennedy's going to be asked very difficult questions about, we mentioned on the show last week, where he goes to Samoa and stirs up resentment or suspicion of measles vaccine, and 83 people die of the measles. He's going to be asked, Mitch McConnell's in the Senate. He had polio as a kid. Bobby Kennedy's going to be asked about the polio vaccine. It's considered one of the great successes in the history of medicine. If he dissembles, if he starts being wishy-washy on that, I mean, this thing could go south for them depending on their behavior, or it could turn the other way if they alleviate some of these concerns.
All right, Carl, last question. We got to take a quick break. Is Trump going to get all these nominees, or is he going to lose someone along the way?
My guess is the Democrats would like one scalp.
Well, I know they'd like a lot more than one, but are they going to get one is the question, Carl. Yes or no?
I think, yes, I think they'll get one.
Wrong.
Well, okay. But it was a trick answer.
Imitation.
I know, but not a trick question, a trick answer, because they already got one. They already got Matt Gaetz.
That's
true.
So you
see, I hedged.
All right, very good. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief and executive editor, and Phil Wegmann. He is our White House reporter. Carl, I'm coming to you on this one. Our next subject is Kamala Harris and what comes next for her. And I'm coming to you because California's your home state, or was at one point. And the rumor is she's going to run for governor of California. And what do you make of that? Is that a good spot for her?
Well, the governor there is now Gavin Newsom, and they've been longtime frenemies. I don't think he wants to switch jobs with her. I don't think Gavin wants to be vice president necessarily. As Phil pointed out, though, we're hearing this not from Kamala Harris, but from other people. And she just ran a tough campaign. She didn't get a lot of compliments for how this campaign was run. What she's gotten from Democrats, however, that she's apparently taking solace in is, it wasn't your fault. It was Joe Biden's fault, not your fault. That's what she's hearing from fellow Democrats. But the California governorship, it's never been considered a job that's a participation trophy or a consolation prize. And so she's going to have
Or a
to
demotion.
a California governor would say that that's not a demotion from VP to governor. It's like Chicago's mayor, Tom. You know that. But she's gonna have to earn it. California is now a one-party state, essentially. And they have these, what they call these jungle primaries. It's everybody's on the ballot. Then the first two vote getters square off. She's got, better name ID now than anybody in that state, other than
I was gonna say, Carl, who could possibly beat her?
than Gab. Well, one-on-one, I don't know. Tom Hanks, Oprah Winfrey. I don't know. Well, you laugh. Ronald Reagan. They laughed at Ronald Reagan.
They laughed at Arnold, but I mean, of course, that was a different era. Phil, what do you make of this?
I don't know it was a different era, but my point is she'd have to earn it, Tom. She'd have to run, and she'd have to run a good campaign.
I think it's hers for the taking if she wants it. The question is, does she want it, and why does she want it? Does she want it as some sort of keep her in the limelight, stepping stone back to the nomination at some point?
All right, wait a minute. Before you go to Phil, though, I will say one thing. There's a funny historic precedent that comes to mind if you're a Californian of a certain age. Richard Nixon was vice president to Dwight Eisenhower. In 1960, he ran against Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s uncle, Jack Kennedy. He lost, closer election than this one, but a close election, very close. Then Nixon went back to his native California and ran for governor. And everybody thought it was his for the taking, Tom, and he got his clock clean by Jerry Brown's father, Pat Brown. So, and he said famously, you won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore.
That's right.
Well, so it sounds like you're telling Tom, we will have Kamala Harris to kick around anymore.
Well, I personally don't see anybody out there who, and I'm not an expert on that state, but I mean, maybe there's somebody rising and waiting in the wings who has the fundraising capacity to match her in terms of dollars raised and get their name ID. But I mean, she would go in there, in my opinion, as a heavy, heavy favorite if she wanted the job. But Phil, back to you. The question is, does she want the job? And if she does want, why would she want it?
It's certainly a worthwhile prize. I mean, California, if it was its own country, would be the world's 5th largest economy. The question that follows, though, is what does she want it for? Because if she's looking to use California as a springboard back to the Democratic nomination, it sort of depends on whether or not Democrats double down on sort of the liberalism that we saw fail during the last election. California's already moved so far to the left that if there's a wake-up call, one that's being led by folks like Senator John Fetterman, then perhaps that's not something that's wanted. I mean, all of the historical examples that Cannon gave, Ronald Reagan, Nixon, all of these others, that's from years gone by, and
the
also
Pleistocene era is the technical term, Phil.
Yeah, the Bronze Age.
Carl started covering politics, right?
Well, but Phil, the thing is, what does she want it for? Well, there's 1,000 jobs in politics. There's only one president. Being governor of California may be a job that she could do and do well, and she wouldn't necessarily need to parlay into the presidency. Everybody, it used to be in this country, if you're governor of New York or California, you'd immediately talk, or senator from those states, you'd be talked about presidential. It's not quite the same these days, but she doesn't have executive experience. If she ran the state and ran it well, she could have a second act where people said, well, we should have given her, let's give her another
to a national political reporter. Everything is a national political story.
Okay.
But wait a minute. Yeah. So she would get elected, right?
Yeah.
She'd be inaugurated in what? January she run in 26. Is that right?
Yeah.
So she'd be inaugurated in 27. She'd
only
have to immediately.
She's only 60 years old, Tom.
No, but I'm saying
we now
if she
elect
wanted
presidents
to
who are 80, she'd have another 20 years.
she couldn't run for president in 28 is what I'm saying.
No,
Because
that's
she
right.
would immediately have to start like running for president, start putting together. So she'd have to wait and hope, I guess, that Republicans won, that JD Vance became the president, and then she could challenge JD Vance. And what are
There
we
you
talking
go.
about? 32?
2032. You just said Vance versus Harris. There you go.
Time is a flat circle. We would get a VP debate finally, the one
Hey.
that was scheduled.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about the other story that made some pretty big headlines over the weekend and has generated a great deal of conversation, if not controversy. And that is the story that ABC News and George Stephanopoulos have agreed to pay $15 or $16 million to Donald Trump's presidential library and to apologize to him publicly for in this defamation case that Trump brought against them for an interview that Stephanopoulos did with Nancy Mace, where he repeatedly said, I think 10 or 12 times, that Trump was found liable for rape, which is not what the court actually found. Phil, let me go to you first on this. I mean, I guess it's a big deal. It's another victory for Trump in the legal circles, and certainly. But some people are saying, "Oh, this is ABC rolled over. They would have won this case in court, and instead of that, they decided to, roll over and sort of pacify him by agreeing to basically make this donation to his presidential library." What do you make of that argument?
Partisans take victory lap story at 11. I mean, of course, Donald Trump is delighted that this has happened. And it seems that, smarter legal minds than mine who actually know how to read law saw that it was in both parties' interest to settle. What I'm curious about is there's sort of normally this fence between opinion and straight news. And then there's supposed to be a larger fence over, political hacks who sometimes can go to the opinion side, but can they be straight newsmen? And George Stephanopoulos, who has done, some fantastic interviews, he has a history, and that is having worked for former President Bill Clinton and fighting off some of the accusations of sexual impropriety from that former president during the '92 campaign. I'm not certain why the, graybeards at ABC News thought that it was a good idea for Stephanopoulos, given his baggage, to prosecute this case during that Nancy Mace interview.
Carl, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously, this is a blow for Stephanopoulos and ABC News. Media organizations' credibility, trust is already in the toilet. So I suspect this is just another data point in that regard, right?
Well, it's not a great moment for the news media. Over the weekend, I watched the entire interview in question because I was curious about why ABC would think that they were vulnerable there. Because Trump's convicted in a civil case of some sort of assault. That's the sexual assault. They didn't use the word rape. Then the judge did use the word rape in his writing about it. It seemed like at the time, a bit of a partisan exercise, and New York Democrats, took a pound of flesh from Trump. But George, who I know, and I covered him when I knew him well in those days of covering Clinton. He spent a lot more time at ABC News than he ever did working for Democrats. So we've got to claim him now. He's one of us. He's in the media.
Okay.
But the thing about that interview is that they didn't want. I think ABC I'm sure they have libel insurance, and they were going to defend this case. And I think they thought between the libel insurance they get and the legal costs they were going to incur, the $15 million was a rational decision. And besides, it goes to a foundation, not directly to Trump. And there's maybe even a write-off. They worked it out in a way that they thought was fiscally prudent. But to your point, Tom, I don't think that interview made the press look good. And it wasn't just about Trump. He really hectored Nancy Mace. She's a
survivor,
of sexual assault, of rape. And Stephanopoulos kept hounding her. How can you, as a survivor, endorse Trump? And she was angry and indignant, but she kept her cool. And she said, "Well, you're trying to shame me. You're victim shaming me. It's a binary choice. I think Trump's better for women than Biden." No, and he just kept coming back and repeating himself. He was like a dog with a bone, and he couldn't seem to get off of it. and I don't say he was acting. I think he was really on. He thought he was onto something. He could get her to address this, and she kept correcting him. She said, "Well, he wasn't found criminally liable. This was a jury case." She was much more precise in her language than he was. He didn't act like a journalist in that interview, and I think that's what he acted like, an advocate in that interview. And again, I like George Stephanopoulos, and I sometimes defend him. But I just didn't think ABC wanted their reputation to rest on that interview. And so they just wanted to make the problem go away.
Well, they've created another problem, at least short term, as folks on the left are mad at them for, as I said, quote unquote, rolling over for Donald Trump. All right, we have to leave it there. Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for RealClearPolitics, Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief. I'm Tom Bevan. You're listening to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to speak with Sean Trendy, our senior elections analyst, about Donald Trump's favorable transition ratings and the 2026 Senate and midterms. Stick around. Be right back. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Sean Trendy. He's our senior elections analyst. Sean, good to have you back.
Great to be here.
All right. So Donald Trump is, we had a poll come out last week, Sean, late last week from CNN that showed 55% of folks approved of Trump's handling of his transition thus far. It's actually, we've seen a number of polls that show this, a majority approve of what he's been doing so far. How important is that? And does that number surprise you that it's that large, or is that what you would have expected?
I mean, so I remember in 2013, 2014, making comments about Barack Obama's job approval tanking after the Obamacare exchanges crashed and burned, and just getting lit up on Twitter with Democrats saying, "Oh, well, I guess that's really going to hurt his re-election effort." Ha ha ha. So in a sense, it's important to remember, no, Donald Trump does not have to run for re-election. His job approval doesn't matter in that sense. Where it does matter, though, is that we're going to have these midterm elections coming up in now 23 months.
But who's counting?
But who's counting? And these things are generally referenda on the party in power. So the fact, I mean, in 2018, the Republicans lost 40 seats during a time of peace and prosperity, in large part because, Donald Trump had spent 2 years lighting his hair on fire. And people didn't like that. And so the fact that this is a much more orderly transition this time, the fact that, every president has a few controversial picks, but by and large, Donald Trump has gotten people like, Marco Rubio and governors and fairly serious people in his administration, I think with a few exceptions, but that's, again, to be expected. I think people appreciate it, and he's acting presidential. And he knows now what acting presidential means, that being president is not the same as running a reality TV show. And I think that's something for Republicans to be optimistic about. Does it surprise me? Absolutely. I mean, the man hasn't had a positive approval rating in, 10 years in the public eye. I understand why it's positive. So in that sense, I guess it doesn't. But, that certainly wasn't my prior view of how this was going to go.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised by it, actually. That I mean, there does seem to be this sense of sort of, goodwill. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but at least optimism by folks who probably weren't, favorably disposed to Donald Trump the first time around, independent voters and maybe even some Democrats. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, the proof is going to be in the pudding. And we'll see where his approval rating goes. But as you mentioned, Sean, I mean, when he took office, I don't think in our Real Clear Politics average, he was never over 50%, even from the day that he was inaugurated last time around. So he's already starting out ahead of where he was in 2016. All right. So you mentioned the midterms. So let's play the game, because that's what we do, and it's super fun. Obviously, the House is going to be in play. There's just no way it can't be, given the slim majority there. But now you let's look at the Senate. So Republicans are going to have a 53 seat majority. And I was looking at the races in 2016. It doesn't look like to me, you tell me if I'm wrong, there are that many competitive seats. Maybe 3 or 4 on each side at most. But it looks like the playing field is going to be pretty small. On the Republican side, you've got Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Susan Collins in Maine, Joni Ernst in Iowa. Those are the sort of the three probably most competitive. John Cornyn in Texas. I'm sure Democrats are going to think they can pick off. They're always after Republicans from Texas, and then on the Democratic side, Tina Smith, Minnesota, Gary Peters in Michigan, and John Ossoff in Georgia. Looking at those races, who do you think has the advantage there? Where would you give the edge in terms of having the more competitive seats or the more vulnerable seats?
I think we do have to say first quickly on the House, the smart money is on the Republicans losing the House because the president's party always loses seats. But, you know, Democrats have picked off a lot of the low-hanging fruit in the last 2 cycles where Republicans have kind of underperformed in the House. There just aren't that many Republicans running in Harris seats for them to go after. But I agree that it's more fun and interesting at this point to talk about the Senate. And I think Georgia potentially is actually the most vulnerable seat of the bunch. Assuming that Brian Kemp gets in and that he manages to avoid a primary challenge. I think Donald Trump has by and large mended fences with the Georgia Republican Party, so I don't think Trump would back a challenge to Kemp. And if Kemp wants it, I think he's a generally popular governor. I think the DNA of Georgia is still pretty Republican. And that's going to be a tough race. On the Republican side, obviously, if Susan Collins has said she's running, and she has a history of running ahead of Donald Trump. So we'll see if Democrats can put up points there. But beyond that, yeah, you got Tom Tillis in North Carolina. I know Mark Robinson is making noises about primarying him, which, if that were successful, is obviously probably the end of the road for him, for Republicans there. But I don't think that we have seen Republicans do some pretty catastrophic face plants over the last 14 years in Senate races. I think that would exceed Delaware 2010.
Christine O'Donnell, I'm a witch.
That would be worse than that.
It's one of the all-time greats.
It was, but that was also kind of like more of a no, we don't like Mike Castle. Let's see what this Christine O'Donnell is. Oh, wait, now that she's won the primary, here comes the dirt on her. This would be like Republicans walking like full into a machine gun nest, right? Like they know what's coming with Mark Robinson. I think one that's kind of underrated is maybe if Laura Trump is the appointee in Florida Senate. That Florida Senate race could go sideways for Republicans, if Gates gets in or if Laura Trump is the nominee and Trump is unpopular. But you're right. Beyond that, I mean, we're talking about like maybe Joni Ernst gets primaried in Iowa and the person is too far to the right for the Iowa electorate. I mean, it's just real Texas, maybe. It's really slim pickings for the Democrats. Democrats trying to get back the Senate is probably a 2-cycle initiative for them.
And Sean, what about should Democrats be worried at all about places like Colorado and New Mexico or any of these other states that we saw a pretty significant shift in some of these blue states to the right when Donald Trump was at the top of the ticket. But as you mentioned, he won't be on the ballot. And traditionally, historically, the first midterm for an incumbent presidency does not go well. But should Democrats have any concern given how the 2024 election went?
So if you look at the places where Donald Trump didn't make big gains, Colorado is in there. Even New Mexico, I mean, surprisingly, given the large Hispanic population and large working class population, didn't, Republicans ran a Domenici, who was kind of like Republican royalty there, and it didn't really move the needle. I think if you're looking for potential soft spots for Democrats, it would be maybe Michigan. Gary Peters doesn't light anyone on fire. So, anyone's heartstrings on fire. So maybe him. Maybe in New Hampshire, if Shaheen retires and Chris Sununu decides he wants to be a senator. But we'll just have to wait and see on those.
What about my home state of Illinois, Dick Durbin? He hasn't declared yet, and he's getting up there in age, and there's certainly some talk about him having lost a step or two. Um, you know, let's say he declines and it becomes an open seat. Any chance for Republicans in the state of Illinois, Sean?
No.
No. All right.
Look, let's look at it this way. It was open in 2010.
Yeah.
Republicans ran probably their best statewide candidate in 20 years there. Republicans ran a criminal, or Democrats ran a criminal, and it was a 2-point race.
You're talking about you're talking about Mark Kirk versus Alexi Giannoulis.
Pre-stroke Mark Kirk against Alexi Giannoulis.
Yeah. And it didn't go well. All right, so fine. So Republicans will continue to be shut out, probably the state of Illinois. I actually agree with that, by the way. But again, we're playing the game. That's what we do.
Yeah.
All right. Sean Trendy, Senior Elections Analyst for RealClearPolitics. Sean, always great to have you. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
All right, going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with Charles Lipson, who's a frequent contributor for us, a columnist, a retired college professor, and just a generally smart and savvy guy. Charles, are you savvy enough to figure out what's the story with these drones that you wrote about?
I'm reminded of Sergeant Schultz in the old Hogan's Heroes, who said, "I know nothing." The government is telling us two inconsistent things. They're saying we don't know what it is, but you shouldn't worry about it. Well, you can say one or you can say the other, but you can't say both.
Well, I'm beginning to think they do know what it is and that they're not telling the truth, but I don't really know why I think that. But they, you've had all these administration officials. This weekend it was Mayorkas, the Secretary Mayorkas, who not only did he not act worried, so maybe we're supposed to take our cue from that, but he kind of did this gaslighting thing where there was this Republican congressman who was from New Jersey who's angry he's not getting answers from the government, and Wolf Blitzer asked him about this, and Mayorkas attacked the congressman, oh, this is unfair to our first responders and our what's he even talking about? And our military people. He didn't quite say military people, but it made me think these drones belong to the U.S. government and that they're doing a test, and maybe that's what they should be doing. And then it's probably classified. But I inferred all that. I don't know.
Boy, I'll tell you, if you do a test, I wouldn't do it over New Jersey.
Well,
those
better
people
than Texas.
aren't calm to
They'd have
begin
shot him
with.
down by now if it was over
No,
Texas.
no, they're not calm to begin with. Look, the reason you're not believing them is that Mayorkas is the guy who told us the border was closed.
And secure.
And secure.
Yeah.
And you can just go through all the things that they've told us that aren't true. But it's not just the Biden administration. If you look back to the 60s, when your dad was doing his great reporting, trust in government was around 70%. And it began to fall off during the Vietnam War, and it's fallen off steadily. They can ask used car salesmen now for advice on how to become more trustworthy.
Well, that you reminded me. So my father, Luke Cannon, covered Ronald Reagan back to his Sacramento days. And Reagan had that great line. It wasn't original to him. He didn't say it was, but he said, the most frightening words in the English language are, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you.
That's exactly right.
But in this case, they're saying we're from the government and you don't need to worry. You just trust what we say and you don't need to worry about anything. And then, so yeah, you're pointing out this is an administration, and I don't use the L word promiscuously. I think politicians say a lot of things that aren't true. They're not always lying. Sometimes they're spinning. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they're guessing. Sometimes they are lying, but it's a lie with a reason. I wrote a whole article for Atlantic Monthly, cover story many years ago. Why, when presidents lie, but still, when inflation hit, Joe Biden's first thing was there is no inflation, and then okay, it's not, but it's only going to last a little while, and then when it didn't last, oh, it's not that bad, and then the Russians caused it, and you know, and then finally his last thing that he finally had to stop talking about it when he said, when I came in, inflation was 9%, and I
Right.
lowered it, which was no, it was like 1% when he came in.
And well, let me just say that the biggest scandal, really, it's one that historians will have to get into, is that we have a president with cognitive decline that they've hidden. And they just keep saying it's not true, and it's just obviously true. But getting back to the drones, the reason that the public doesn't believe it is A, they can see lots of them. B, they're not getting an explanation for what they are. And when they do get an explanation, it's that they're all airplanes. Well, some may be, and in fact, they all may be. But then that gets us to C, which is they've told this is a Chicken Little problem. Chicken Little told us time after time that he was in trouble, and then and he wasn't, and when he really was in trouble, nobody believed him, and that's the problem that they've got now, the Chicken Little problem.
Well, let me ask you another thing that I wondered about. Remember that Chinese spy balloon that I mean, I didn't look it up, Charles. I probably should have. It just occurred to me while we're talking, but I
Right,
think it floated from like Alaska all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean or something, all the way
right.
across the country. And you know, and the Biden administration was really squirrely and odd about that. That clearly wasn't one of ours, and it clearly wasn't an airplane. It was a Chinese spy balloon, we later found out. But did they erode their credibility for the reasons as you're talking about now with that episode? Did that play into this?
Absolutely. And in my article on this, I mentioned the Chinese spy balloon for just that reason, Carl. Remember, they didn't tell us about the spy balloon. It was the public that saw it and then asked about it, and then they gave us, the badee yada yada answers, and nobody believed them. And I think that um, that it's just inconceivable that the Trump administration would have allowed that to fly all the way across the country without taking it down. And we still don't have an explanation. There may have been good reasons why the Biden administration didn't take it down, but nobody would take them on faith.
Well, and again, they gave sort of conflicting
Right.
rationales. You're listening to Charles Lipson, retired professor and a frequent columnist, Real Clear Politics. I'm Carl Cannon, RCP bureau chief. But Charles, you and I remember the Vietnam era. I was a teenager, you were slightly older, but you and I came of age politically in that time.
Right.
And the public stopped believing necessarily what presidents were telling with good reason. What could be done to restore that faith in government? Because I think ultimately you want voters to be skeptical, but you don't also want them to think everything the government says is a lie. That probably isn't healthy. What could we do to change that dynamic?
I'm really not sure. You don't hear professors say that often, do you?
No, they're going to revoke tenure if you hadn't retired already.
By the way, I went to the LBJ library in Austin within the past month, and it has a wonderful exhibition, a temporary one, on the Vietnam War, and including living rooms that are set up with Walter Cronkite on TV and so forth. And that brings me to one of the problems that any government will have in restoring confidence, and that is there is no Walter Cronkite. There's no trusted um, there's no trusted broadcast. Everything is fragmented. In fact, what Real Clear Politics does is quite unusual. You publish editorials and viewpoints and so forth from all different sides, and I think you have a readership that probably comes from all different sides. But that's unusual. The people who are watching uh, one podcast on the right are not watching the others on the left. And as a result, and these are podcasts and channels, cable channels, and all the rest that have no particular incentive to play it like Walter Cronkite. It'll be very interesting to see if News Nation, which is the WGN in Chicago's effort to create a sort of down the middle channel, can take market share, because I think so. I'm saying that part of the problem is the new media environment, and I'm not claiming that the problem is that we have worse newsmen than ever. I'm claiming that the problem is a segmented market because of the technology, with a lot of incentives to appeal to it. The second point is that we have a lot more technology to see what the government is doing. When Jack Kennedy was dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was over a week into the crisis before people noticed that all the top people in the government were missing from public sight.
Well, there's a Pierre Salinger told that he was the press secretary, White House press secretary, and he told John F. Kennedy rushed back to the White House. I think he was in Canada. Said that Kennedy had a cold.
Yeah.
And this was later a source of controversy. And Salinger later acknowledged maybe he shouldn't have done that. Even in those days, even lying to the American people about a minor thing like that, it was a major story, but that was kind of a white lie cover-up. Has been deemed by people who've looked at presidential lying to be problematic. That the idea is that I think the American people, they don't spend all their lives doing what you and I do. They tune in and out. But if they're lied to about a little thing, they think maybe they're lying about a big thing. And this is what we were talking about the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Charles, we're gonna have to leave it there now, but I hope you come on the program soon. When we figure out exactly what these drones are, we can
I
talk
think
about
I see one right behind you, Carl.
And that'll do it for us today. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. You can listen to RCP on SiriusXM Radio or watching on our podcast. And please join us again tomorrow.